2000, we bought an abandoned 100-acre farm in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We spent years cleaning it up, built a new house, and now are trying to make it a functional homestead farm. Welcome to Red Tool House.
Hello everybody, I'm Troy at Red Tool House. In this video, we're down here in the wood shop. I say we, it's actually just me. I'm down here in the wood shop and make a little sawdust, but what are we going to do? It's that time of the year where we want to get some plants started for our garden, so I want to build a cold frame. Well, the first question, of course, is what is a cold frame? If you're not familiar with that term, it's basically a very simple thing. It's a box, and it can be made out of anything. But it's a box you set outside that has some sort of transparent top. Imagine like a little mini greenhouse. Has a transparent top. It can be glass, plexiglass, plastic, whatever. And that top allows sunlight to come through, and it heats up the ground, and obviously heats up that box, the contents inside that box, and get your soil temperatures where they need to be able to get some germination going, get some plants started. And what it does, it allows you to start early. If you instead of starting your plants inside, you can start them outside. But obviously you have to watch your temperatures at night as well. So we're going to build one. And so I wanted to document that here in the wood shop. But I'm not sure if everybody really wants to watch me build something. That's kind of it's kind of new to our channel. We really don't get down here in the wood shop and do much. Based on our survey from several months ago, some of you did request some construction type projects, but this is kind of carpentry. This is a little bit over in the woodworking area, so we'll try it. And I tell you what, if you don't like it, comment below, let us know, and then I'll obviously just see how people watch it. If I don't get a lot of people watching it, then I'll know to kind of stay away from these type of subjects. So how am I going to build this? Well, actually what's going to drive the design is my translucent piece of material that I have. And what I happen to have is, walk over here and get it out of the shot. I have a piece of glass. And this glass was one of those deals where I have helped some friends clean out stuff. Hey, can you help me clean out my outbuilding in there? I'm moving. Can you help me move some stuff? And it never fails. Anytime I go help somebody move stuff or build stuff or do whatever, there's always a, hey Troy, I don't want this anymore. Would you like it? And since I can't say no when it comes to that kind of stuff, I usually end up with a bunch of stuff. And as you see shots of my wood shop, you'll understand just how much of a sickness that is. But I've got this piece of glass. I have several pieces like this, but this is just a single pane piece of glass, about an 1/8 inch thick. And I believe it's about 20 by 64, 20 by 65 roughly. Yeah, 64 and a half actually. So 20 inches by 64 and a half. So this would make a nice top to our cold frame. Now again, you don't have to have glass. You can use plexiglass. I actually have another piece of plexiglass here, a little bit smaller. I've got several pieces. But the problem with plexiglass, well, it has the benefit of being flexible and not as, you can't break it obviously like you could break glass. So it can still be broken, but not as easily. That would make more sense as far as durability goes, but if it's not UV protected and you've got it out in the sun, it'll actually yellow pretty quickly. And as it yellows, and of course the ability for sunlight to pass through it diminishes, and it kind of looks ugly. It eventually get brittle and break. So we're going to pass on the plexiglass and stick with the glass. So I'm letting the size of this glass really dictate the size of my cold frame. I could, if I wanted to have this cut down, make a smaller cold frame than I could, or try to find a smaller piece of glass, or even find a larger piece of glass. I've seen cold frames just as simple as somebody taking hay bales and just laying them out in a rectangle or a square, and taking an old window and just sitting it on top of those hay bales and putting some weight down on it. It could be something that simple, just anything that's going to allow that solar radiation to pass through and have some sort of insulative properties. What we're going to do is build this out of wood. So we'll have, I'll have a rectangular frame that this fits on like a lid, almost like a box top or a toy chest type of lid. And I'll probably build the box so it has an angle. So as the lid sits, it doesn't sit flat, it actually sits at an angle. So as I put it up near the house and have it south facing, where we are, of course, south facing toward the equator, so the sunlight will be able to come through that angle a lot better, and obviously have better solar effect there. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to let the piece of glass dictate the size of the cold frame. So there's a variety of ways to build this frame. I'm going to build the lid first. Like I said, let the piece of glass dictate the size of the box itself. And there's a bunch of varieties of ways that I can build this, but I really want to put a wooden frame around that glass to protect it, to keep it rigid, and of course just to have a nice area as we close that down, that it's something solid. So I've got a bunch of scrap 2x4s. This one's got, that one's got a bit of a twist in it. Looks like a dog's hind leg, actually. So I may have to find a better 2x4, but I'm going to take a 2x4 and use that as a primary building material for this frame around this glass. So obviously the 2x4 is a bit overkill. We don't need something this big, this wide, so I'm going to rip this in half so I can have twice as much material. And then what I'm going to do to have the glass be able to fit in there is I'm going to cut a dado, or a groove, into that wood, a little channel, if you will, that glass will fit into. And it'll just fit in all around it. Now I actually will assemble the frame around the glass. Now if you didn't want to have something so permanent, if you wanted to recover your glass easier without having to bust your frame apart, then you could do kind of like a picture frame. A picture frame doesn't use a dado or a groove, it uses a what's called a rabbet, which is kind of an L-shaped cut. So it would, if this is your board, this is the edge of the board, you're just cutting out, of course, a portion, a channel of that. You're just cutting out a portion of that so that the glass can just sit right down into that little ledge that it creates. And that's the way you see most picture frames. Well, that requires some sort of hardware or adhesive to keep that glass within that frame. You know, if you just laid the glass on there and you turned it upside down, your glass falls out. With what we're doing with the dado is obviously it'll be nested inside, so no matter which way I turn that glass isn't going to fall out. So I'm going to go that direction versus the picture frame versus the rabbet, simply because it keeps me from having to deal with other hardware, and that'll be the sturdiest way to build that. So we'll jump right into it. Alright, so I've discovered a 2x4 that's got a little less walk to it, so we'll give that a shot and we'll rip this in half. So obviously we know a 2x4 is 3.5, so we're going to go 1 3/4 inches. Doesn't do any good to have a safety push stick if you leave it over on the workbench. Don't do that. Okay, I think looking at the dimension of my glass, now I have the two sides, but I'm pretty certain I can even get the two smaller sides out of these two pieces of material. So one 2x4 is going to be able to build this frame for me for my glass area. Well, that brings us to the next question is, how do we do the corners? So again, if we're going to just put a wooden frame around a large rectangle of glass, then we have to do something with those corners. If you think of a picture frame is a miter, a 45-degree angle and stuck together somehow. Picture frames actually have these little brad pins that go in. So we could do that, or we could do a lap joint, which is where you cut half of the material away from one board and half of the material away from the other board, and they kind of fit together like that. That would work. Or we could simply just do a butt joint, where one of the pieces, maybe the shorter piece, just butts into the side of the longer piece, And I could use, I've got pocket screw capabilities. I could use a pocket screw there, or I could even take a long screw and screw it this way, or have another piece of wood to scab over it. Again, we're not building a clock here, so there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. One thing I want to do when I'm building this, I don't want to get too specialized where it requires a special tool. Again, I don't know if you guys are going to be interested in building something like this and would use this video to help navigate that. I don't want to build this project and you think, oh wow, I got to have all this woodworking equipment that Troy has to be able to build this. No, you can do this with simple carpentry tools. Table saw just makes things easier. You could do most of this stuff with a circular saw. The groove would be a little tricky with a circular saw, but most of this stuff you could do with just simple carpentry tools. Okay, what I've decided to do is to go with the lap joint. I think that'll make for a nice strong joint, be pretty much idiot proof. Look what I said there. We'll see, we'll prove that. If I mess it up, I'll edit it out. That way I can keep up with my idiot proof comment. But again, a lap joint is going to be one of those deals where I'm going to take half the material thickness away from this and half of the material thickness away from that, so they kind of lock together there. And then I can just put a couple screws in there or glue it, whatever I want to do. But first I want to cut my dado, or my groove. And the first thing I want to do is just figure out the thickness that I need and the depth. My game plan on the depth is to go 1/4 inch. So it gives 1/4 inch of the glass can be recessed into this wood on both sides. So I took that into consideration when I made my measurements here, because that obviously the frame would need to be 1/2 inch smaller on either dimension. But I'm going to put a 1/4 inch deep dado in this, the thickness of that piece of glass. It can be a little bit wider, of course, but imagine the wider you got, the more slop you've got, the ability for that to rattle around. So we'll get that set up and give it a test here. Down in here 3/4. One thing I like to do and highly recommend is, especially using wood that's dimensional, or even any wood for that matter, is if you know where you're going to put your groove and you know what your face is going to be and what's the back, go ahead and mark those. That keeps you from making a mistake as you pass through the processes. And since I ripped these 2x4s in half, the cut piece, the cut face, is where I want to have my groove, or my dado. So I'm just going to put a G, writing a G on the cut face. I can write a G, G, G. And then we also want the faces marked. So I'm going to do a F for a face here, F for a face here, F for a face, F for a face. And that'll just make sure I've got my orientation of the wood right as I go through. And what I'll do too, since my fence, I'm trying to find the dead center of this 2x4 thickness, but if I was off just a little bit, I don't want that glass, as I line those up, I don't want that glass not to be able to ride perfectly in that groove. So making sure I've got all my F's against my fence, F for fence, F for face, then this distance from this edge to the starting of the groove will always be the same. Keep it consistent. Well, I can tell you one thing, that pine is easier to cut through than that hickory I was cutting the other day. Doesn't even feel like it's cutting anything. All right, I'm pretty certain my kerf of my saw is just a little bit under the thickness of this glass. Yeah, so it could possibly go on there if I wanted to hammer it on, but not a smart thing to do. So what I'm going to do, this is where having that face marked is going to be very helpful as well. I'm going to bump my fence over just a cat's whisker, and that is a woodworking term. That is a unit of measure. Just depends on the size of the cat, of course. No, we're going to just bump it over just a little bit, maybe the kerf, or maybe half the kerf of the width of the saw blade. So give it a little rapidy tap tap. Get my mic cord out of the saw. Okay, so we give this a test drive. There, perfect. Just a little bit of slop, not much. So that's going to work for us there. It's going to hold that glass in place and give us what we want. Well, one of the most critical considerations for a lap joint, of course, is making sure you remove the material from the right side of the piece for each one that you're going to marry. So this is my top rail, this is one of my sides, so they're going to overlap right here. The thing you want to do is to make sure that you remove the same amount of material that you leave behind. That's how this works. Since this is the same thickness and this is the same thickness, in theory we want to take exactly half of this material away so it leaves exactly half remaining. Same here, half and half. So when those two halves marry up, everything lines up the way it's supposed to. That's the way it's supposed to work. So that's what we're going to do. Now, so what kind of tool do you need to do to do a lap joint cutout? Well, you've got a fancy woodworking blade that's called a dado blade. Excuse me, and that would be something like this. Now this is two blades that you put on your saw, and then you can put these extra blade inserts in between, and it stacks them. I'll get a little closer there so you can see that everything's covered in sawdust in my wood shop. So that allows you to stack those up, and you can go as thick as a full inch. So if I have a full inch dado stack put together, when I pass this wood through the saw, it's going to remove a full inch of material at a time. So you can see we only want to go the width of this 2x4, which is 1 3/4 inches. So you can see in less than 2 passes, I could have that material removed. So again, if you don't have a table saw and you don't have a dado blade, it's not that you can't do this, it's just going to require a little bit more work. What you can do, we call it the poor man's pass. You get your mark, get your fence set up, and you just go through multiple times. And even if you have to come back and chisel it out, use a chisel and chisel out your material there, or even just tap it out however you need to. I'm not going to cheat and use the dado. I'm going to go ahead and do the poor man's pass, and we'll take it from there and see how it goes. All right, so I've got my fence set up, and I'm going to use my miter square here, my miter gauge, to keep this perpendicular to the fence, because obviously there's not enough material there to keep that flush. Now, I'm just cutting a groove. I know some of you guys are cringing already, but keep in mind, if I was actually doing a cutoff where this piece of material was going to get cut off, I would at least be a dead man, or I'd regret the decision I made if I was cutting that off, because as soon as I pass through that and it cuts off, this becomes a pitching machine. So that's why you never want to use miter gauge and a fence together, because that'll come right back and hit you. I actually have a scar right here. I'll keep from showing you, but I have a scar right there from learning that lesson. But in this situation, again, I'm not releasing any material. This isn't cutting all the way through. This is only cutting halfway through, so it'll be safe to do. But I've got it set up. My fence will stay in that fixed position, and I'm just going to confirm, yep, that's where my cut's going to go. And I'm going to make my first pass. I'm going to confirm my depth as well. Yep. So I'm going to make my first pass. As you can see there, right along the line, there's my cut, just inside my line that I have. And then again, I don't know if this will show up here. Yeah, the depth. So there's the groove. And here's the cut that I made. So as I start to release all this material, then that'll be my lap. So now it just becomes a series of repetitive processes. So as you can see, this has a tendency to be pretty monotonous. You can see where that stacked dado blade would come in handy and save a lot of time. But, you know, it still works. We've got a lot of gaps there, so we can just bust that out. That actually kind of reminds me of the teeth of the girl I dated in high school. And yeah, I know you guys are thinking, wait a minute, didn't you date Kelly in high school? Yeah, that was before braces. It's all right, she never watches these videos anyway. So like in this situation here, I've already just broken them out with my fingers since it's pine. Again, not a whole lot of rigidity there with the pine, but I can come back with that with a chisel and clean that up. So we'll clean that up a little bit and we'll do a test to see how it fits. So we'll give it a little dry run here and see how she fits. So this would be the face and the back side. And I see there I've got a nice clean fit. See if I can get that closer. So there we go. So that is a lap joint. And here we can see too that the, see if that shows up there, that groove lines up. So that should hold the glass and we should be in business. So let's stick her together. This is where having some help would be dandy. Oh man, like I knew what I was doing. Love it when a plan comes together. Watch, I'm gonna break it here in the last. Being all hoity-toity here. Well, there we have it. There is our cold frame lid. If I wanted to shore it up a little bit more, if I was worried about, I don't know, the cat, stupid cat, or chickens, seems like cat and chickens are the bane of my existence, jumping up on top of this and possibly going through it, then I could put some additional pieces. I believe those would be called muntins. That would go in here to stabilize that a little bit more, but I don't know, I think it'll be all right. But the next thing we'll move on to is the box. Well, I'm going to stop right here so it doesn't make this video too long. We're going to bust this up into two parts. The next part, I'll build the box for the cold frame and we'll install it and give it a test drive. If you like this type of video, please comment below and that'll let me know whether to do more like this. Again, if I'm in the workshop, I'll try to make subject matter that's in line with homesteading type stuff. Give us a thumbs up if you don't mind. Subscribe if you haven't. And be sure to check us out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4:30 is when we post videos. Take care, everybody.